Centuries of myth and fantasy have painted pirates as adventurous rogues sailing under the Jolly Roger, but the truth is far darker and more brutal than any Hollywood script. Real pirates were not charming rebels. They were ruthless killers and opportunists who thrived on terror. The romanticized image of swashbuckling heroes, treasure hunts, and daring escapades has long captivated our imagination. But it's time to peel back the layers of fiction and confront the harsh reality of piracy in its historical context. In the Caribbean, figures like Blackbeard tied slow-burning fuses into their beards to appear demonic in battle, striking fear before even lifting a sword. This theatrical display was not merely for show. It was a calculated tactic designed to instill terror in their victims. The psychological warfare employed by pirates was just as potent as their physical weapons, often causing ships to surrender without a fight. But the horror didn't end with surrender. It was only the beginning. Pirates murdered captives, tortured sailors for hidden valuables, and spread fear across seas already fraught with war. Their reputation for brutality was well earned, and the stories that reached port towns were enough to make even the bravest sailors think twice before setting sail. Captains would recount tales of entire crews being slaughtered, their bodies left to rot as a warning to others who might cross their path. The ocean became a playground for these merciless predators, where human life held little value beyond the potential for ransom or information. Unlike the organized navies of empires, pirate crews lived in constant mutiny, where loyalty lasted only as long as the loot flowed. The romantic notion of honor among thieves quickly dissolves when faced with the reality of pirate society. Alliances were fragile and betrayal was commonplace. A successful raid could turn crewmates against each other in an instant, with greed overriding any sense of camaraderie. The pirate's life was one of perpetual insecurity, where today's ally could become tomorrow's executioner. When ships fell to their attacks, survivors often faced mutilation, slavery, or execution. The fate of those unfortunate enough to be captured was grim indeed. Pirates were known to employ horrific methods of torture to extract information about hidden treasures or to simply satisfy their sadistic urges. Accounts describe prisoners being keel-hauled, dragged under the ship's hull, their flesh torn by barnacles, or having limbs slowly crushed in the ship's machinery. The lucky ones might be sold into slavery, while others were forced to join the pirate crew under threat of death. Evidence from court records in London and trial transcripts in the Americas shows horrifying accounts. Captains forcing prisoners to run gauntlets of knives or abandoning crews on barren islands to starve. These were not isolated incidents but common practices among pirate bands. The legal documents paint a picture of systematic cruelty that goes far beyond the sanitized versions presented in popular culture. Witnesses would recount in gruesome detail the torments inflicted upon captives, often breaking down in tears as they relived their ordeals before the court. At their peak in the early 18th century, pirate fleets disrupted entire trade routes, costing European powers millions and forcing navies to adapt new strategies. The economic impact of piracy was staggering. Merchant ships were forced to travel in heavily armed convoys, dramatically increasing the cost of trade. Insurance rates skyrocketed, and some routes became so dangerous that they were abandoned altogether. The great powers of Europe found themselves in a constant state of naval warfare, not just against each other, but against an enemy that recognized no flag and followed no rules of engagement. Yet behind the cruelty lay a paradox. Pirate codes sometimes granted democratic voting and shared spoils, a stark contrast to rigid hierarchies of kings and merchants. This aspect of pirate life has been seized upon by some historians as evidence of a proto-democratic society emerging on the high seas. Indeed, many pirate ships operated under a system where the captain was elected by the crew and major decisions were put to a vote. The distribution of plunder was often more equitable than the pay structure of merchant or naval vessels, with even the lowest-ranking pirate entitled to a share of the spoils. Still, these flashes of equality cannot erase the overwhelming reality of violence. The democratic elements of pirate society were ultimately in service of a criminal enterprise built on theft, murder, and destruction. Whatever egalitarian principles might have existed among the crew did not extend to their victims, who were subjected to unspeakable horrors regardless of their status or wealth. The pirates' code was a pragmatic solution to maintain order among a group of violent criminals, not a noble experiment in self-governance. The pirate myth was softened for books and films because the true stories are almost too savage to sell to audiences. Hollywood has long recognized that the public appetite for adventure and romance far outweighs the desire for historical accuracy. Dashing heroes like Errol Flynn's Captain Blood or Johnny Depp's Jack Sparrow bear little resemblance to the brutal men who actually terrorized the seas. Even more serious attempts to portray piracy often shy away from the full extent of their savagery, preferring to focus on the more palatable aspects of their lifestyle. When you peel back the romance, you find men who ruled by fear, lived by blood, and left behind a legacy of terror written not in treasure maps but in trial records and naval dispatches. The real pirates were not lovable rogues or misunderstood rebels. They were hardened criminals who chose a life of violence and cruelty. Their victims were not just faceless merchants or corrupt officials, but ordinary sailors, passengers, and coastal villagers who lived in constant fear of attack. The treasure they sought was not buried in chests on desert islands, but in the holds of ships and the pockets of terrified captives. Pirates were not heroes. They were nightmares that haunted the seas. Their legacy is one of pain and suffering, of lives cut short and fortunes destroyed. The romantic image of the pirate has persisted for centuries, but it's time to confront the truth. These were not men to be admired or emulated, but criminals whose actions caused untold misery and whose influence extended far beyond their own time. The real story of piracy is not one of adventure and freedom, but of greed, violence, and the darkest aspects of human nature unleashed upon the high seas. As we look back on this era of maritime history, it's important to remember the real victims of piracy, the countless sailors, merchants, and civilians whose lives were destroyed by these ruthless predators. Their stories, often lost in the glamorized retellings of pirate adventures, deserve to be heard. By acknowledging the true nature of historical piracy, we can better understand the complex realities of the past and the ongoing challenges of maritime security in the present day. The pirates of old may be gone, but their legacy serves as a stark reminder of the consequences when lawlessness and brutality are allowed to reign unchecked on the high seas.